That's about the time when people go back to their own lives. Like when you first have a loss, there's people visiting, there's people
Yeah.
sending
Yeah.
cards and flowers, people bringing over meals. But at some point, people go back to their normal everyday life. And it's usually around 3 weeks in that things stop coming in the mail, people stop calling, people stop visiting and bringing food. And you're kind of left with the finality of that. And so that's around the when that, if you haven't been mourning and, processing the loss on the way to it, you could settle into a deep
Mm.
depression. And then once you come out of that,
You are now tuned in.
You are now tuned in to Let's Talk About Healing on Hindsight Media Radio 103.5 FM. Now here's your host, Yvonne Pierre.
Hello and welcome to Let's Talk About Healing, where I have conversations with guests about various topics on healing the mind, body, and spirit. Today, we will be talking about grief and loss with Tracy Taris, a licensed marriage and relationship therapist, speaker, and author of Many Voices, One Truth. I love the title. She is the owner of the Southern California-based Healing the Mind and Spirit, where she leads a team of therapists. Tracy also works as a therapist with college students at the Santa Clarita Valley's College of the Canyons. I wanted to have this conversation because there are so many losses going on right now. We're seeing it all in the media, everywhere we look, everywhere we turn, whether it's a celebrity or during this COVID. And the numbers are mind-blowing of how many losses has been. To lose someone was the greatest fear of mine. Just the thought of it was traumatizing. I was constantly thinking about death, so I intentionally worked on finding peace with it. I'm still a work in progress, but I've made peace with loss, not just death. So let's talk about it. Tracy, welcome to the show.
thank you. Thank you, Yvonne, for having me.
Before we get into it, what are the different forms of grief?
Well, there's lots of people experience grief in many different ways. There's the entire umbrella is grief and loss. And grief is a process that you engage in when there has been a loss, whether it's a great loss or whether it's what some people might term a minor loss. It's circled around the concept of loss and having something in your life that you no longer have. So the different ways that people can experience grief is the loss of a loved one, which is normally, for most people, the biggest kind of loss and the most finite kind of loss. Like you can't replace
Yeah.
a life. Other kinds of losses that people might endure would be loss of a job, loss of a
Mhm.
home, loss of, some kind of status or loss of money, all of which those things can be replaced, but the loss of a loved one is the one that is final in
Yeah.
nature.
Yeah. And even with losing, a job or losing anything that you had hoped for, I was one that really struggled with not just death, but loss of anything, because of my abandonment issues and that stemmed from my father being murdered. My father was murdered when I was a year and a half. And even though I don't have any memories of him, just that absence of him and the fact that someone took his life affected me in so many different ways, that it made me it was traumatizing to think of losing someone else. And I seem to have mourned his death ongoing for a long time because I was longing for a part of him that I've never had or I never experienced, like the way he smelled, the way he walked, the way he. So that mourning was a little different than losing my grandmother or someone that I had memories with because of that that feeling that I'll never have that with him.
Yeah.
But what are
Yeah.
the dangers of not allowing yourself to mourn?
Getting stuck. There's lots of different dangers, but one of the preeminent ones is getting stuck in where you are in
Mhm.
life and not being able to move forward. For instance, when you say that, my father died or was taken from you at a year and a
Mhm.
half, and you was holding it and dealing with it or not dealing with it for a better part of your life, that is one of the biggest, sorry about the siren, that is one of the biggest casualties of a grief and loss and not processing it, because you can get
Yeah.
stuck in where you are in your life, and meaning like you can't move forward emotionally, which means it inhibits your ability to have close relationships for fear of losing the person, or it inhibits your ability to have close relationships for fear of always being like easily triggered, having fear on board. Another way that unprocessed grief or not working through it, it could start to manifest in somatic symptoms, which means, sometimes people will start having physical ailments that have no medical
Mm.
basis. And a lot of times, that's a manifestation of holding in emotion. Like grief is an
Yeah.
emotion and it has to be expressed and it has to be processed. So, unprocessed grief can hinder your life physically, relationally, and emotionally. And even in other ways too, like with your career, things that you want to accomplish and do, you might find that it's difficult for you, and underneath that is can be, not for everyone, but can be a deeply embedded feeling of
Mhm.
unworthiness because you lost someone so close to you. There's a belief that could come on board that you are unworthy of love. And so, with that belief and with that as part of your identity, it makes it, almost impossible to accept the good or accept relationships or accept wonderful things that come into your life because of that deep seated belief of unworthiness. So it's paramount that people allow themselves to feel the depth and the breadth of the loss and process it either with a professional or a grief counselor, like a professional therapist or psychologist or a grief counselor or a pastoral counselor, someone that has some kind of experience with helping those who have lost.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the main thing too, is that we don't know how to process it. I know when my grandmother, I mean, I've had a lot of losses over the years, like many of us, but when I lost my grandmother about maybe 13 in 2010, um, at that time I was getting my in school and I had only one more class to finish, and I wouldn't allow myself to process it because I was afraid that I would just completely lose it or not finish school, and I just put in my mind that I'm finishing for her. So I made losing her a part of my goal to finish, like my inspiration to finish school, but not processing it and not allowing myself to mourn and suppress it did have other effects where later I had to push myself to process it because I felt like I was becoming numb. And that's because it
Mhm.
was 2 losses back to back, her and my uncle, her oldest son, my uncle Albert died
Mhm.
7 days later. I
Wow.
couldn't help but, like, go numb, but I
Mhm.
knew that I needed to process it, and I needed to overcome this fear of loss because it had such a
Yes.
power over me that it affected everything. Oh, I would say infected
Yes.
everything, in my life. But is there a difference between mourning and grief?
There is a difference between mourning and grief, but I want to go back to, if you
Okay.
don't mind, something you said about you had no choice but to go
Mhm.
numb. One of the things about numbness is like people think of numbness as an absence of feeling, like, you go numb so you don't
Yeah.
feel the pain. And a lot of times the brain will do that because the feelings are too
Mm.
overwhelming. And so what is happening is there is an overabundance of feeling. Like we only have capacity for so much feeling at one time, that when it just starts filling up in our system, like our emotional reservoir, our emotional bank, if you
Yeah.
will, gets tapped out and overflowing. And so there's nowhere else for the feelings to go. So it's like the brain just stops registering it. I mean, and a good analogy is if you think of, um, if you've ever been out in the cold and it's so cold that your feet start to freeze, or your
Yeah.
fingers, and you can't feel
Yeah.
your feet or your hands anymore, it doesn't mean that your feet and your hands are not
Right.
there. And it doesn't mean that they're not in pain. It's just that they've gone numb due to the overabundance of
Mm.
pain, that it just taps out and your brain just can't
Yeah.
process it
Yeah.
anymore. It's still receiving the messages, but it's not really processing. And that's kind of like a segue into the difference between grief and
Mhm.
mourning. Grief is the experience of sadness and loss when you have lost a loved one, or when you have lost something important to you, even a
Yeah.
loss of hope. If there's something that you've hoped for and had your hope in, and it just seems to be delayed and keeps getting delayed, you can lose hope for that. And the feeling that you will feel is grief and loss, and accompanying a lot of that is
Yeah.
sadness. The difference between grief and mourning is grief is just, it's kind of there as a result of what's going on. But mourning is what you can engage in as a result of the grief. It comes out of grief, and it's mourning is when you're actually
Mm.
processing the sadness, the loss, the anxiety, the story. A lot of people forget about the story component of mourning. Part of mourning is talking about the
Yeah.
loss. I remember when one of my aunts lost her
Mhm.
husband, and they were very much in love, very much had each other's back. I mean, I believe I learned to love a man by watching her love, and so I remember her talking with me and my first husband at the time
Mhm.
about him. And then he's my ex-husband now, but he said to her, I don't really like to talk about stuff like that, and just kind of shut her down. And she was very gracious about it, and she goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, it's just that it makes me
It's comforting. Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
better, know, talking, talking about it." And I just felt really bad for her that he said that, but I also felt proud of her that she stated her truth in the moment. And she didn't look like crestfallen or sad
Yeah.
or anything. He stated he didn't basically want to hear it. And she honored that, but she explained why. Like she wasn't trying to, it wasn't
Right.
about him. And for me, that was kind of like a red flag of, I probably need to get out of here.
Yeah.
I mean, there had already been all kinds of red flags and pink flags, but when he did that, to my aunt, I couldn't believe that someone would say that to someone who's
Yeah.
mourning and processing a loss like that. So mourning is the processing of the grief, whether it's you're talking about it, journaling about it, praying about it, reminiscing and remembering, emoting, allowing when the memories come forward and the sadness comes after that, allowing for that sadness, allowing for that ache to be there and sitting still in it until it passes. At some point, you do get to the other side of mourning. It doesn't mean that you forget the person that you lost. It doesn't mean that your love for them diminishes. It just means that the edges of the sharp edges of the pain are rounded out, and you're able to kind of weave it in as part of the tapestry of your life, so that it's not defining you and it's not hindering you. It just becomes part of your story.
Mm. So I know there's a lot of people that they, I don't know how to say it. It's like they stay in that grief or mourning because they're afraid to let go, as if letting go is letting go of the person and the memories. It's like they see it as a bad thing to find peace with it. Finding acceptance with the loss seems to be more terrifying for them than to continue to mourn.
Yeah. Well, there's probably different reasons for people not letting go, as many as there are different people. But because everyone's different in how they live their life and how they think about things. But some of the common reasons for not letting go is I think that there's some kind of unconscious belief that letting the person go would mean that they're lost out there
Mm,
somewhere. Like the memory of them is all that's
yeah.
left of them. And so even people of faith, like even people who believe that, there is another life on the other side of this one can kind of struggle with that. But when they are struggling, it's usually an unconscious
Yeah.
struggle. Like I remember this one cartoon. I don't know if it was Coco. It was a Disney
Mhm.
movie whereby in the afterlife, a person is only able to live in the afterlife as long as there's one person that remembers them. And that's why some of the Latin cultures have the Dia de los
Mhm.
Muertos, the Day of the Dead, where they all get together and they remember their dead. And basically that's kind of a passage or a permission for their loved one to be still existing in the afterlife. So I think that one of the reasons that it's hard for people to let go is some kind of unconscious
Yeah.
attachment
Yeah.
to that. And I'm not saying that that's not true or or
Right, right,
or
right.
anything like that. Yeah, I'm just saying that I think that some of the things that we believe, some of those beliefs cross over in an unconscious
Mhm.
manner. Another reason that people are afraid to let go is they think it's honoring the person to constantly be in pain and hurt and turmoil
Yeah.
and tears, almost like they're sacrificing their life for the
Yeah.
memory of that person. And I remember my grandmother saying something about, we're supposed to let go, like we're supposed to, grieve and let them go because it kind of keeps them hostage, so to speak, kind of keeps them from resting. They can't enter fully into rest. And again, I'm not saying I
Right.
believe or disbelieve that either. I just think that there are lots of, what is the word, traditions and beliefs that cross different faiths and cross different cultures that people unconsciously adopt.
Mhm.
I think that sometimes people refuse to let go out
Yeah.
of guilt. There's something left undone, something left unsaid. And because now they can never say it or do it, that's their punishment to themselves for not having done what needed to be done or what they think needed to be done
Yeah.
or said what they think needs to be said. So those are like some of the most common. I'm sure there are other common ones, but again, I think that there's probably as many reasons as there are
Yeah.
people for the
Yeah.
reasons why people refuse to let go and
Yeah. I
process.
was talking to someone the other day that was having memories of their loved one and talking about it, but the way they looked at it was if they're still grieving. And I was telling them that this person was embedded in your life, your whole life. You're never gonna not think about them. Like I never not think
Yeah.
about my grandmother. I think about her almost every day, but I'm not still grieving over her. And I was just
Yeah.
letting them know that just because you're thinking about them doesn't mean that you're still grieving. So it's
Yeah.
okay. You're not gonna forget them. So, yeah, and it's okay to have those thoughts and smile and laugh or even be sad sometime when you think about them. Um, but you just can't stay there.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
can't.
Speaking of that, what are the stages of grief?
Well, we use an acronym called DABDA, and D is denial, where the person it's denial, like they're in denial that this has
Yeah.
happened. Like, and you hear the person say, I can't believe this,
Yeah.
or this must be a dream, or whether they're saying that out loud to other people or to themselves. And then anger, being angry that this has happened and looking for someone to blame and looking for a reason why, or there must be some reason, or anger that there seems to be no reason. Bargaining is when you start bargaining with God, saying, if, you erase this day, or if we can go back in time, or if, then I will, thus and so. Just engaging in some kind of bargaining. And then depression, D is for depression, where the sadness just kind of set in, the person becomes like almost immobilized. And research has shown that just as, how that they say it takes 21 days to form a habit. Well, it takes more than 21 days to form a habit, but that's
Yeah.
the belief out there that it takes 21 days to form a habit. It actually takes 21 days to start a habit, and then another 21 days to get it embedded into the neural circuitry of your brain, and then another 21 days for a full 63 days for it to become accepted and automatized. And so during that part, like the first 21 days, they found that when a person experiences the loss of a close loved one, it's not all losses, and it's not all loved ones. It's the ones that are the most impactful, the
Yeah.
closest one. Around day 21, the person, it just comes on them, the weight of that loss comes on them like a
Yeah.
ton of bricks, because there's a final realization of the finality of it. And for a lot of people, that's about the time when people go back to their own lives. Like when you first have a loss, there's people visiting, there's people
Yeah.
sending cards and flowers, people bringing over meals. But at some point, people go back to their normal everyday life. And it's usually around 3 weeks in that things stop coming in the mail. People stop calling, people stop visiting and bringing food. And you're kind of left with the finality of that. And so that's around the when that, if you haven't been mourning and, processing the loss on the way to it, you could settle into a deep depression. And then once you come out of that, the last A in DABDA is acceptance, where you do start incorporating it, integrating it as a part of your experience, the tapestry of your life. And so the thing about these stages, they're not linear. You sometimes they are, a lot of the times they are, but people kind of weave in and out of these stages. Some people skip some of them. It's not a guaranteed, first you're going to deny it, then you're going to be angry, then you're going to bargain, then you're going to be depressed, and then you're going to accept it. Some people go through that in that way, but and some people just kind of weave in and out the different stages.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, I know for me, yeah, I've definitely been through all stages. But
Mhm.
I'm learning to get to acceptance quicker. And I think
Mhm.
that's the more I accept that loss is a part of life, the quicker I can get there and,
Mhm.
find ways to honor them and to, I don't like to use the word let them go, but to find acceptance, peace with their with losing them.
Mhm.
So what does unhealthy grief look like?
Not processing it, like getting in a place in one of the stages of your grief and getting
Mm.
locked there. I mean, there are some people who go into a place emotionally and relationally and stay there. So, and what that might look like behaviorally is adopting unhealthy behaviors, like maybe substance use or drinking, overspending, getting in and out of relationships, overworking, like anything that you're doing in excess to escape the pain and the suffering that is occurring.
Mm,
So it can look like a lot of things, again, as varied as there are people, but it may manifest as an inability to regulate yourself and your emotions. So someone that's easily angered, or someone that falls apart at the drop of a hat, or goes into an anxiety state and puts themselves on lockdown, getting not able to go to work, or inability to keep a
yeah.
job, lots of different, it's just so important because grief and loss is a part of life. It's part of the
Yeah.
life cycle. I believe we were created for eternity, and I believe that we have spirits that are
Mhm.
eternal, but this body, because of the fall on
Yeah.
the earth, this body is not designed to be forever. And even in scripture, it talks about when all of this is said and done, and everyone will receive a new body, one that's
Mm.
incorruptible. And this body is
Yeah.
corruptible, and it's not going to be here
Yeah.
forever.
I have realized that sometimes we grieve the loss of something or someone just from a diagnosis. And I would just say for me, when I had a heart attack in 2017, I was in and out the hospital for years. And, because my stents closed. And then a year later, my stents closed again. And went through rehab like 4 times. And now I have heart failure. And
Yeah.
that I had to go through a grieving process for myself. And in a way that I went through the different stages of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then now I'm at acceptance and accepting the fact, that I can prolong it by the way I live, my lifestyle changes and,
Yeah.
and that it's not an immediate death sentence and looking at life a little differently. Like now, instead of exchanging gifts, I'm really, really big on exchanging experiences. I'm really, really big on,
Mhm.
you know, my kids having experiences with me. Like we went horseback riding and we went indoor skydiving. I really want to skydive, but my doctor said no, not right now. Um, one day. So, so, but I wanted different experiences, and that was the main thing I thought about when I was. And I'm not going to get deep into the story, but when I had my heart attack, I went into what's called cardiogenic shock, which
Mm.
I had
Wow.
4 different blood transfusions and they had a hard time stabilizing me. And I was on a machine that kept me alive for 6 days. And my heart started fully beating on its own after the 7th day. Yeah.
Right.
So the 7th day, my heart began to beat on its own. But during that healing process and the grieving process, I went through a stage of survivor's
Mhm.
guilt really bad, and I stopped wanting to tell people about my journey because I was like, their loved one passed because of this, and I felt like I was throwing in their face that I didn't. So it was a whole
Mhm.
process, a whole grieving process of like you said, the different stages of grief, for myself.
Yeah.
And then I said, okay, but I'm still here. So I need to live while I'm still alive and not sit around grieving my death when I'm still. So that was
Exactly.
something I had to come to grips with and get closer to God and become more spiritual and, and really praying and asking God, okay, what do I do while I'm here?
Yeah. Yeah.
So now that we talked about what unhealthy grief looks like, what does healthy grief look like?
Meeting yourself where you are in the moment. And for some people, what that means is if it's at all possible, taking some time away from your regular life. And that doesn't necessarily mean leaving home and going somewhere, because not all people have resources to do that. But it could mean taking some time off from
Mm,
work, so that you can grieve and just be home sitting with the loss, but also reaching out to a grief counselor or a therapist to help you process the
yeah,
loss, surrounding yourself with people who love you and loved your loved one. And even if they don't understand, they can empathize with you in your loss. And some people will understand. It looks like taking it to God and praying, talking about what your feelings are and what's going on in your heart, journaling what your feelings are and what's going on in your heart, and engaging in self-care. So self-care means, it could mean something as simple as going to bed at the same time every night and getting up at the same time every morning, like to get your the biorhythm of
Yeah.
your body working properly as you're going through this grief. It could mean getting exercise or getting some things taken care of with regards to what your needs are. It might mean reading, whether it's, nonfiction books on grief and loss, or reading books just to escape, like things about things that you want to do or try or whatnot. But healthy grief is a processing of the grief. And there's lots of different tools for that, from self-care all the way to seeing a professional, and just different things that I've mentioned in between. But you're basically not pretending, you're not stuck in any of the stages of grief. You're kind of traversing, going in and out and through the stages, and you're processing the feelings as they're presenting.
Is there a time period where, okay, you've been there too long in any of the stages? In each stage, I know it's not like, okay, you're going to be a week here or a week there.
Wouldn't that be nice if that were
But is there a stage where, okay, you're not processing this, where whether it's a loved one or a friend or something, and it's like, okay, they've been here, lingering here a little too long. They need some help.
That is measured less by time and more by
Mm,
symptomology. So, like some of the things that we talked about earlier with regards to what does unhealthy
yeah.
grief look like, and why it's important. Some of those things will be going on. That's when you know that, if you're feeling stuck in your life, if it's difficult to move on, if your emotions are, out of whack, if you're engaging in behaviors that interfere with the functioning of your life, or if you can't
Mm,
function. And that time period, there's no set time period for any of the stages. There's no set time period. It's measured more by the degree to which it is functioning in your
yeah.
life, interrupting the functioning of your life, and the degree to which you are still able to function, even though you are going through and processing some of this.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to talk about how, especially in the Black community, and we've been seeing a lot of people publicly talking about, like Charlemagne and Taraji, talking about mental health and the shame and the stigma that we have in the Black community with getting help, and even with grief, no matter what it is that they're struggling with, about seeking help. So I want you to take a moment to speak on that, about why it's important for us to get rid of that ideology that there's something wrong with getting help.
Yeah, that's a tough one, because it's so deeply embedded in the
Hmm.
culture, in our culture of, you put your head down and you just keep going. And if there's something, if you're not able to do that, then there's something
Yeah.
wrong with you. It's been generations and generations of that. And so that's why it's hard for people to meet themselves where they're at, and experience what they're experiencing and talk about it. And so when I say meet yourself where
Hmm.
you're at, if today you wake up and you're feeling sad because of a loss, or feeling, out of control, or feeling desperate, whatever the feeling is, you acknowledge its presence, and you allow yourself to sit
Yeah.
with it, rather than trying to get rid of it, because these are emotions and they will dissipate over time, but only if you allow yourself to feel it and talk about it and pray about it and journal
Mm.
about it.
Yeah.
And I think that in our community, in the African American community, in the Black community, it probably comes all the way back, from the ships, the slave
Yeah.
ships, where, I'm sure that was a terrifying experience, but people had to kind of band together in as much as they could, or band together with themselves to try to get to the other side of that, because they didn't know what was on the
Right.
other side. Lo and behold, they get here, and, families are split apart. People are auctioned off like cattle, and you find yourself working on somebody's property that you don't even know, and it's against
Yeah.
your will. And so in order to survive that, I'm sure a lot of people develop the mindset of, I need to get it together, keep it
Yeah.
together, because I would imagine that something so horrific, a lot of people were probably in the denial stage a long time, thinking that surely this is a mistake. Surely, our people will come and save us,
Yeah.
and, there's people coming for us, and then after, a few hundred years of that, realizing that there's no one
Yeah.
coming.
Yeah.
And so I think it's person by person, and it's people like, Taraj putting out there that it's
Yeah.
okay. Go and get the
Yeah.
help you need. It's okay for us to talk about it. It's okay to look at some of these issues. And then hopefully the generations that are listening to that start to believe it's okay. Because some of the things that we believe, we don't even know we
Yeah.
believe it. It's just stuff that's handed down, and it's in our DNA, it's in our bones, it's in our blood, and we don't even know that it's
Yeah.
there. So to have someone speaking out and saying, get help, acknowledge, feel, process, get to the other side, someone that looks like you, saying that, some of the scales over time will start to fall off of people's eyes. And, listening to shows like your show, where healing is of the utmost
Yeah.
importance. It's just going to take time, but it is possible. And I believe that there is less of a stigma attached to therapy in
Yeah.
general, and even in the Black community, because when I first went into private practice, I probably had like, a handful of Black people that would come in. And now it's probably, I don't know, 50-50 or
Oh,
60-40,
well,
something
that's
like that, where, and I think it helps that I advertise as a
yeah.
Black therapist, and I have my picture out, and stuff like that on my platform, so people can see, and what I look like, that I look like them, and
Yeah.
things like that. So I think as much as there are those of us out here trying to do this work, that stigma prayerfully will be less and less. And I think it is. I think it is
Yeah. I see a
decreasing.
difference.
Because
Yeah.
yeah, even when I was in my graduate program, getting my master's in clinical psychology, there were two other women, and I think one male, Black
Mm.
male. But now, in some of these programs, you see a lot more color in the
Yeah.
chairs in some of these programs, where people are looking into getting professional licenses to help people process mental health issues.
Yeah. It's very important. I was talking to someone a few years ago. I was thinking about going to see a therapist, but the thought of going was traumatizing for me. And it was like, I want to fix it myself. And then I said, the fact that I'm saying this and the fact that, I had developed this habit of when I go through something, I'm going to Google it, I'm going to research it, and I'm going to figure it out. And I'm going to come out of this, which is not bad, but I go to the doctor for everything else. Yeah, I'll put a
Yeah.
Band-Aid on, or yeah, I'll put some peroxide here and there, and I'll doctor some things, some small minor things, but major things I go to the doctor. And you don't have to have, and sometimes I go to the doctor as a maintenance. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong, and I had to change my perspective of mental health, because I realized mental health affects your overall health. And if
Yeah.
I don't care how much working out you're doing, how much eating right you're doing, if your mental health is off, and you're having issues with that, is going to impact the rest of your health and the process of healing. There was a time that the first time when I had my heart attack, I got out the hospital. I had this gung ho, let's do it. Tell me what I need to do. But then when everything, I did everything and I, was very, very disciplined. I wouldn't even go out to eat. I cooked everything, because I was afraid to eat other people's food. Because you don't know how much salt they're putting in it, how much sugar or whatever. Anyway, so went through that, and then when my stents collapsed, it was like I did everything right, and I still almost died, and I was devastated about that, and my attitude was a little different. It wasn't as gung-ho, and I realized I wasn't healing the same as I did the other time. I wasn't healing it quickly. It's like I started going backwards because of my mindset. So I realized, oh, that's the engine. Not just my heart, but my mind is the engine that's going to help me heal. So I started really focusing on, meditating more and all that, and getting my mind conditioned and opening my mind to talking to a therapist, So yeah.
Yeah, mindset is, that's where the healing begins. Everything begins in mindset. Like a decline will begin in mindset, and healing begins in mindset, and the degree to which where you want to go from here. Like sometimes people have an unconscious desire not to get well. Like there might be a conscious desire to get well, but then an unconscious desire of the worthiness or unworthiness of being well. A really good book that I often have my clients read that talks about the link between emotions and physical health is Deadly Emotions. And I always forget his name. Don Colbert, Colbert, Understand the Mind, Body, Spirit Connection.
Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah, I have that book. Understand the Mind, Body, Spirit Connection that can heal or destroy you.
Wow, I'm gonna have to check that out. I wrote it down.
The thing about it is he talks about specific emotions like, anger and hostility, anxiety. Yeah, it's a very good book. And the reason I like his book is not only does he talk about the emotions and the eventual effect it could have on your physical health, he gives you interventions, exercises that help you to deal with that. I think it's good to, like, especially if a person is having somatic symptoms, meaning like they keep going to the doctor for aches and pains and things that they feel like are wrong, but then the doctor can find no medical reason. I think that having a book like this and working with a therapist through the book is beneficial.
And that's Deadly Emotions.
Yeah, Deadly Emotions by Don Colbert. And he's a Christian. He's a doctor. He's a Christian doctor, and he uses scripture and talks about, the power of faith.
Grief can be debilitating. How do you help people process to move forward?
Helping them to acknowledge the loss and feel the emotions that are attached to the loss in the first stage. And then we move to a stage where I use a method that the Grief Recovery Institute uses. Like if someone is having grief that is interfering with the therapy process, I usually will refer them out to a grief specialist that works just with grief, and then either work in conjunction with that grief specialist, or the client will come back to me after they've processed the grief. But if the grief is a component of what they're going through, I'll use the Grief Institute's loss history graph, and that is a timeline whereby on a horizontal line, they write the different losses and the memories, and then we assign different acronyms to the loss. So And the acronyms are SES and that means significant emotional statement. And so what that means is, what is a significant emotional statement tied to this loss that you either never spoke or allowed yourself to feel, or that you believe you did have, but didn't know you had at the time or couldn't articulate it at the time. And so they'll write, because of this loss, I felt such and such, and it's emotion words and things like that. And the reason that's important is because whenever there is anything major or traumatic in our life, there's always an emotion that's attached to it. And if in the moment you can express that emotion, talk about it, then you can probably let it go. But if you haven't, the loss history graph will allow you that opportunity to write down that emotion and then talk about it and process it right then and there. The other acronyms that are used are A for if there's anything for which I need to make amends or apologize for that's attached to this loss. F, which means, is there anything or anyone that I need to forgive in order to release? And I usually put in G or T, which is gratitude or thanks. Is there anything that I received from this loss or learned from this loss? Have I been strengthened in any way that I could have gratitude or thankfulness for? And another component of the loss history graph is, what do I wish were different, better, or more? The person would write that down and we discuss it and whatnot. And then at the end of processing the whole graph, the person writes a letter to complete it, where all of the things that they've included on the graph, they write it in the letter, and then they release it, they forgive. Like when you're writing the forgives and the apologies on the graph, you don't say, I forgive you or I apologize. You say, I need to forgive. I need to let this go. And then when you write the letter, by the time, and it's usually several sessions by the time you get to the letter, if you're in the place where you are ready to forgive and release, you write that in the letter, I forgive you, I let this go, I need to move on with my life. And then you read it in session, and I'm the holder of it, like the witness to the closure of this. Now, like I said, like when grief is something that's getting in the way of the rest of their therapy, I'll refer them out to a grief recovery specialist who will do this same thing, but just at a deeper level. And so I just kind of make that assessment based on how the person is talking about it and how it's manifesting in their life, whether it's something, because I can work with it, but I think that there are others that can work better. And so I will do what is best for the client. If, whatever is going on would be better served by, someone that's a grief recovery specialist, then that's what I will do, is refer them out.
Speaking of books, can you tell us a little bit about your book, Many Voices, One Truth?
Oh, why, certainly. So I wrote this book. I mean, I'm a psychotherapist, so I treat people in therapy, marriages and families and individuals and whatnot. And one of the things that I notice in working with people is the power of, thoughts and how people's thinking gets them in this place, or that place. The catalyst for writing the book occurred when one of my baby sisters, I'm the eldest, and one of my baby sisters had a stroke, and she was only in her late 30s. And my sisters and I, there's 4 of us in California. She was in Texas at the time, and we went to help her and to be with her. And while I was there, I was, running around trying to get services in place for her eventual discharge from the hospital. And I just started feeling just this anxiety and just this fear. And I didn't know why. And the anxiety and fear made me want to leave and come back home to California to the safety of my husband and children, my own family. And then I started feeling guilty and, and sad because of that. And I called a friend of mine, and she helped me to process and work through what I was thinking and feeling. And she said, what you're feeling and what you're going through has nothing to do with your sister's stroke, but it has everything to do with what you believe about yourself. And so what was highlighted was the fact that when I was little, my mother traced a palm on my hand, and told me I was going to die young. And for years, I believed that. Like I went through all my teen years and early 20s believing that I would die
Yeah.
young. And I dealt with that. Like I went to therapy. I dealt with that. I prayed about it. I talked to God about it. And eventually I stopped believing it, but only on a conscious
Yeah.
level. It was still a belief that was deep down. So seeing my sister go through this at such a young age, it brought that belief up. And so I realized that there are a lot of people out there that believe in God and that believe what God has to say for other people, but not for
True.
themselves.
Yeah.
And so I decided to write this book, Many Voices, One Truth. And I used the analogy of broadcast networks because I grew up with only 4 broadcast networks. And so the broadcast networks I use in the book are Self, Satan, Society, and
Mm,
Savior, and how all 4 of these networks compete for your
yeah.
attention. And I differentiate, I show the reader how to tell the difference between each of the voices, what they sound like, the kinds of messages you'll receive. But I also give interventions, just like, Dr. Colbert, that show you how you can release yourself, like how you can change those thoughts from negative thoughts and untrue thoughts to thoughts that are more edifying and that build you up. How you can tune out voices of self when need to be. Not that self is always bad. Society when need to be. Not that society always
Right.
bad. And Satan whenever that's around, and then learn how to tune into the Savior's
Mm,
voice, and believe, what he says about you, not only in his word, but in the impressions that you receive by spending time in his presence and spending time in silence and solitude.
that sounds amazing. I'm gonna have to check that one out too. And it's Many Voices, One Truth. Where can they pick it up?
Apparently, it's everywhere out there because I Googled it the other day when it was first released. It's available on
Mhm.
Amazon. And you can put in my name, TracyTaris. You can put in the title too, but if you just put in the title, other stuff will come up as well. But it's also available on Barnes and Noble. And if you Google it, you'll find it on Goodreads and lots of different bookstores out there.
Mm,
And you can follow me on Instagram at Tracy Taris and at Healing the Mind and Spirit. We are a group psychotherapy practice here in California. And if you are a California resident and you would like some therapy or need to talk with someone about something, you can go to our website, Healing the Mind and Spirit, and look at the bios of the staff therapists that are here, and then call the office and make an appointment. We offer telehealth services and in-person
okay.
services. And if you'd like to hear more about me or from me, you can join my email list at tracytaris.com.
You say you do telehealth. Can people call in from outside of California?
You can call in from outside of California. We have a few coaches
Mhm.
here that offer services via coaching, and those are not limited to state line, but psychotherapy, therapy services would be California
Okay.
residents.
Tracy Taris, thank you so much for joining us, but also thank you for everything that you're doing to make a difference in this world because your work is needed. Your work really is impactful for those who are willing to come see you, come see a therapist in general, but specifically I'm talking about you right now.
Mhm.
So
Well, thank you. I received that.
thank you for that and putting the book out because I really believe that our life is about service and you're definitely doing that. You're providing service that help people live their best life.
Oh,
So
thank you.
thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
And to our listeners, look me up on social media. I love to hear how these episodes are helping you. Please check out all the episodes. Also go to my link tree, which is linktr.ee/Yvonne.Pierre. And also check out the guest. Thank you so much for tuning in to Let's Talk About Healing. Be sure to follow, like, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Look, You owe it to yourself to grow and heal on purpose. Until next time, be blessed.
Thank you for tuning in to Let's Talk About Healing with Yvonne Pierre on Hindsight Media Radio 103.5 FM. We hope you enjoyed the show. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share.